In the Anointment book, there's a section called the Anointing Oil Pathway. The anointing oil begins as brain fluid, then goes to spinal fluid, and then seminal fluid. If we think too much, we deplete the brain fluid. If we work too much or work out too much, we deplete spinal fluid. And if we have sex too much, we deplete seminal fluid. If we overthink, we lose our character. If we overwork, we lose our charm. If we indulge in sexual activity hedonistically, we lose our charisma. So the anointing oil is born in the choroid plexus, in an area of the brain where it is produced. It then passes through an area of the brain called the claustrum. It then descends to the medulla oblongata, a part of the medulla oblongata called the central canal. Here's where the anointing oil travels from the brain ventricles through the central canal of the medulla oblongata to the spinal cord. So the medulla oblongata, the central canal, connects the brain to the spinal cord, and the central canal is the passageway of the cerebral spinal fluid, the anointing oil, from the brain to the spinal cord. The brain fluid or anointing oil is also called cerebral spinal fluid. This anointing oil is a psychological and physical seed which can be called a psychophysical seed. It's not just sexual intercourse, which is physical, that we are moderating and performing at the right time and the right kind, meaning love over lust, but it's also a psychological intercourse where it's a spiritual intercourse. If we do a bad deed or fail from doing a good deed, this interaction is considered immoral intercourse with the divine. So interactions with people, God, and self is a metaphor for spiritual intercourse. So the anointing oil travels from the brain through the central canal of the medulla oblongata down to the spinal cord and is surrounded by an area called the subarachnoid space. The oil travels to the solar plexus, which is where our belly buttons are, and is associated with intuition or a gut feeling. If we are angels and ascend up from this point, we can return the good oil from whence it came. We can also return to the land of nativity from whence thou camest. In reality, most of us are archangels, and we descend to the sacrum, which is known as Egypt and this world. And we also sometimes descend to the coccyx, which is known as hell, Gehenna, Sheol, Hades, purgatory, the underworld, etc. So the oil travels down to the sacrum, and the lowest point is vertebrae S2 in the sacrum. However, even though the oil or cerebral spinal fluid doesn't descend to the coccyx, the nerves of the coccyx are still exploited. The coccyx is the tailbone, and when we are hedonistic, it is as if we are acting animalistic, as if we had our own tail, repeatedly stimulating the tail of the nervous system with pleasure, exciting our tail. So most of us are archangels. We've descended to Egypt and hell and have been slaves to our ego and sin. But there's nothing wrong with learning from our mistakes. We still can ascend back to the land of nativity from whence thou camest, and we could still return the good oil from whence it came to heaven, to the Garden of Eden, which is the brain. The brain is the heavens, the heaved up. At the tailbone is where we can perform the heave offering and lift ourselves back up the spine to heaven, and eventually there will be no more heaving, because in heaven, heaving is no more, or heavy lifting is no more. It's a place of comfort and bliss. So when we perform the heave offering, we make sacrifices of sadism and masochism and give them up. In Egypt, which is the burnt offering on the sacrum, we sacrifice aggression, dominance, and arrogance. This is where the 10 plagues are released by the prince of Egypt on the sacrum. The 10 plagues are basically degrees of separation from God, but they can be simplified into 5 degrees of separation. So once we ascend from Egypt, the sacral plexus, up to the solar plexus, we become born again. And the solar plexus is known as Bethlehem, which is the house of life where Christ was born. And it's also known as Goshen, which means to draw near, where Moses was born, and a gut connection, also called intuition, is formed. Here on the solar plexus, we sacrifice envy, sloth, greed, and wrath. After we are born again, we ascend up to the cardiac plexus, which is the heart chakra. This is where our stony heart turns into a heart of flesh, where we sacrifice antipathy and apathy for sympathy, empathy, and love. After we ascend to the cardiac plexus, we can ascend to the pharyngeal plexus, which is called the throat chakra, where the vagus nerve or pneumogastric nerve is found. Here is where we sacrifice lies for truth. Now, if we can balance our nervous system and balance the sympathetic nervous system with the parasympathetic nervous system through good eating, not overeating or undereating, good peaceful behavior, alcohol, caffeine, and sexual moderation, we can activate the reticular formation and what's called the RAS, the reticular activation system, and open what's called the thalamic gate. In survival mode, this gate, the thalamic gate, is closed, and the basal ganglia gate, also called the sleep gate, is opened. The thalamic gate is associated with love, and the basal ganglia sleep gate is associated with fear. If we can balance the nervous system and perform intense breath work, either through meditation, yoga, or controlled high-intensity weight training with good form causing heavy breathing, we can accelerate the cerebral spinal fluid, also called the anointing oil, up the spine all the way to the pineal gland. All the way to the pineal gland at the third ventricle, called the pineal recess, where the pineal gland is bathed in cerebral spinal fluid. If enough cilia is tickled by the cerebral spinal fluid and enough pressure is placed upon the rhombohedron crystals that have calcium and fluoride blocking the anointment due to calcification and fluoridation, if enough pressure is placed by the cerebrospinal fluid on the crystals and the cilia, sacred chemicals are released. These sacred chemicals that are released are serotonin, melatonin, epithalamin, arginine, vasotocin, DMT, and most importantly, GABA, which is the holy anointing oil. We want GABA neurotransmission and gamma brainwave emission. Once enough cerebrospinal fluid reaches the pineal gland and the thalamic gate of the thalamus is opened, vision is granted, and a golden perception is achieved. Now, not only are we experiencing biochemical GABA neurotransmission, but we are also experiencing electromagnetic gamma brainwave emission. Gamma brainwave emission is responsible for superconsciousness and produces an electromagnetic force field, and GABA neurotransmission is responsible for a complete relaxation and calmness, where we can now perceive the totality of reality. We can now perceive the complete picture. Noradrenaline is also associated with gamma brainwave emission, where now we can concentrate perfectly and appreciate the wonderful beauties of life. It's not quite the alertness you would get from running away from a tiger, but it dulls the nervous system slightly and allows the perfect mental conditions to take in and appreciate the countless blessings of life. So this pathway is truly returning the good oil from whence it came. It's also returning to the land of nativity, the Garden of Eden, the heavens, the brain from whence thou camest. This is the anointment process, where our cup overflows with the anointing oil in the epithalamus, where the pineal gland is located behind the thalamus, which is responsible for golden perception. This is the anointing oil pathway.